in for a treat tonight, so thank you for joining us. We are about to present Lyric Digital Stage Write Out Loud number 6. And it's the first presentation of the Write Out Loud series that we would normally see in our lyric theater, but which is now on our digital programming. And eventually, in the not too distant future, we're very hopeful that we'll be back in the theater and presenting this live once again. But in the meantime, thanks to your support and your response to these videos, we are happy to say that people are enjoying them and being informed and entertained by some of our wonderful guests. So I'm Gordon McCall. I'm the Artistic and Executive Director of the theater. And along with Joan tonight, we have Glenna Switzer, our very own Glenna Switzer, who is going to be providing the musical interlude. And our host from the Write Out Loud committee is Terry Taves. You know, every presentation we make, we say that we are honored and privileged, which we are, to stand on Treaty 4 lands. I wonder if all of us know what Treaty 4 is. It's a large expanse of territory here in southern Saskatchewan, and it is the homeland of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We say this every time because we think it's important to say it every time, to say that we respect and honor the commitment that we've made to reconciliation and collaboration with Indigenous nations. And we also want to say each time that we stand in solidarity with all people who stand in opposition to oppression, lack of freedom of expression, and the violent suppression of free speech and basic human rights. We stand with members of the Black community, people of color, Indigenous peoples, 2S LGBTQ communities, people with disabilities, and all who experience oppressive marginalization and systemic racism and hatred, including injustice of this nature that occurs in our own country. And as we are all very well aware, there's a lot of attention to this at the moment because of the unfortunate incidents that are happening in terms of oppression in our own country, in the United States, and around the world. So we want to say that each time. And now not just say it, we stand by it. Now I want to pass the proceedings on to our wonderful host for tonight, Terry Taves, and she will take us into Lyric Digital Stage Write Out Loud number 6, featuring Joan Thomas and Glenna Switzer. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new season of Write Out Loud. I am Terry Taves, and I sit on the Write Out Loud committee of the Lyric Theatre in Swift Current. Like you, all of our committee members are missing the hive of creative activity that is the Lyric Theatre, and we wish we could be meeting you there for our season opener. We will hope for the best in the not too distant future, however, and in the meantime, we will have to depend on our imaginations and our memories to visit our beloved theater. Meanwhile, join me in your mind's eye as we enter the theater lobby, pay our admission, and then make our way to the creative heart of the lyric. Vernalyn and Myra are behind the bar, ready to offer us a drink or a snack, and they have started the popcorn popping. Can you smell that quintessential theater aroma? Maria is buzzing around, taking care of all of us, doing any of a dozen jobs, often seemingly at once. Choose your table, admire the art on the walls provided by the Art Gallery of Swift Current, enjoy the ambiance, and chat with your friends as we wait to enjoy a performance from a talented local musician and the thrill of listening to a Governor Award-winning author share her winning novel. Now I give Mark, who runs all things technical, the nod, and the house lights go down and the stage lights come up. And here I am on stage. Well, you've disappeared because I can't see you once those stage lights come up. I know you were there though, and I know we are all in for a very special event of music and literature. I'm here to welcome you to our opening night of the new season and to tell you a little bit about our event. Glenna Switzer, who needs no introduction to our Swift Current audience, is going to entertain us with some of her original music. Glenna is a multiple Saskatchewan Country Music Award winner, a much-loved music teacher to many, and a woman who never seems to run out of energy and who never seems to lose her engaging smile. She promises that someday she's going to expand her writing accomplishments and write a book, and we look forward to that day because we know it will be as entertaining and interesting as her music is. Our featured author, Joan Thomas, won the 2019 Governor General's Award for her novel, 5 Wives, which she will present for us tonight. The GG is a major achievement. But Joan Thomas's novels have never failed to catch our attention and to educate and entertain us, and to win an impressive list of nominations and awards. Be sure to look up her other novels, Reading by Lightning, Curiosity, and The Opening Sky, as they are all excellent books set in a variety of time periods and locations, and which all feature unforgettable characters. 5 Wives is written with compassion and insight, and the characters will live on in your imagination long after you've finished the book. It's the kind of book you are sorry to see end. It's the kind of book you want to reread, and it's the kind of book you want to share with your friends so that you can discuss it in detail. We wish to thank the Writers' Union of Canada for their support in bringing our featured author to the Lyric digital stage. And the Write Out Loud Committee is thrilled to have Joan Thomas join us for our first event of the 2020-21 Write Out Loud season. Thank you, as always, to our audience for joining us once again for Write Out Loud. We look forward to meeting you either online or in person whenever that becomes possible. Enjoy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joan Thomas, and I'm thrilled to be part of Write Out Loud's first ever virtual season. I want to thank Gord for engineering this whole thing so masterfully. It's a bit of a steep learning curve for writers like me. And I want to say a very warm thank you to Terry for the introduction and for our exchange over the winter, partly about my book and partly about other issues that we feel passionately about. It was a real pleasure. I had a great time at the Lyric Theatre when I was there in 2013, and I'm so sorry that we can't do this in person. But I want to thank you for showing up at your computers, where all of us are spending a lot of time these days, I know. The novel that I'm going to tell you about tonight is called 5 Wives, and it came out in the fall of 2019. It's the story of a disastrous missionary attempt in Ecuador in 1956. It's based on real events. A year before it came out, you might remember an incident in the news that treated a very similar situation. A young American man, a 26-year-old man named John Chow, became obsessed with reaching a reclusive Indigenous people in the Indian Ocean, and he approached them several times. He wanted to reach them with the gospel, approached them several times, and was eventually killed. And I was very interested to watch the international reaction to this, because people were not outraged by the killing of this 26-year-old. They were outraged at his cultural arrogance, in thinking that the North Sentinelese needed to hear him shouting, "My name is John, I love you, and Jesus loves you," in English, of course. These were protected people because of their vulnerability to contact diseases, and there was actually a law against approaching them. And so there was quite an international reaction against it. I watched that with a lot of interest because the situation so closely paralleled the events that my book treats. In the story that I tell in 5 Wives, 5 young American men died. And a lot of people know about this incident. It was known as Operation Auka. They know about it largely because of this book. It's a memoir. Elizabeth Elliot, who was the widow of the leader of the group, Jim Elliot. She wrote it a year after her husband was killed. And it was a book that had a lot of attention in the US. It sold 500,000 copies. And actually, it was very well known on the Canadian prairies as well. I think partly because Elizabeth Elliot attended Bible college at Three Hills, Alberta, where there's a chapel named in her honor now. So I knew this story very well as a young person, and some of you in the audience might have known it as well. Elliot's memoir tells a similar story of obsession. The isolated Indigenous people at the center of it were called at the time the Auka. Auka is actually a term of contempt that's used in Ecuador, but the missionaries had mistaken it for a tribal name, and the people that they were trying to contact are actually known as the Waorani. The Waorani were highly skilled trekkers and hunters, and they had lived in isolation in the Amazon for at least 6,000 years. Their language is a true isolate. They had never, to anyone's knowledge, had a peaceful contact with the outside world. They had adamantly defended their isolation against conquistadors, against oil explorers, against rubber harvesters, against missionaries. And in fact, in the 1940s, Shell Oil withdrew from the region partly because so many of their exploratory crews had been killed in spearing raids by the Waorani. The violence of these attacks contributed to a real mythology about these people. Growing up and knowing this story, I believe that they were the last uncontacted people on Earth. I don't know for sure if that's something that the missionaries said, but it certainly was part of the mythology. And in the 1950s, the Western world did not shrink from calling them savages. In fact, 5 of the books on my bookshelf that I used in research use the word savage in their title. One of them is actually named a saint among savages because some of the missionaries in this enterprise had the surname Saint. These missionaries knew nothing about Waorani culture. They did not speak the language, but nevertheless, they were determined that they would take the gospel to these people. They had all the advantages of an industrial society. They had 2-way radios. They had a single-engine plane, which they landed in Waorani territory. They had a battery-powered megaphone through which they shouted phrases that they fondly believed the Waorani could understand. And they had guns, and they went in armed. The 5 men had one friendly meeting with 3 forest people, and eventually photos were recovered from the pilot Nate Saint's camera. One of them shows Nate Saint dressed in pants and a t-shirt, squatting beside a long-haired man with balsa plugs in his earlobes and just wearing a hip cord. It's a photo that has really become iconic. The man scarfs down a hamburger while somebody smears insect repellent on his back. And because they didn't have any common language, the missionaries relied heavily on the charms of American culture. That first day they demonstrated a yo-yo, and they played the harmonica, and they blew up balloons for their visitors. But if anything, the visitors just looked bored. And then on a second face-to-face encounter, all 5 men were speared to death. They left 9 fatherless children behind under the age of 7. It's really striking now to look at how that story was received in North America. The US was in the midst of the polio crisis, the polio epidemic, but nobody talked about contact diseases in any of the news articles that I read about this incident. The world was galvanized by it. Life magazine sent a photographer in, and they ran a major feature about it. Elizabeth Elliot's memoir was commissioned by mainstream press and was eventually published in Reader's Digest. And it was really crucial to shaping the way people thought about this mission. She asserted that step by step, her husband and his friends had been led by God, and that God intended to make martyrs of them, to sort of raise people's awareness of the gospel and I guess the model of sacrifice. It turned out that this book actually had, or this story at least, had several more chapters, because in 1958, Elizabeth took her 3-year-old daughter and trekked into the rainforest to the settlement where the clan who had killed her husband lived. She went in with a female partner, a missionary named Rachel Saint, who was the sister of Nate Saint. And for various reasons, these women succeeded where the men had failed. They were received kindly by the Waorani, many of whom became Christians. And so this contributed to the mythology that God had martyred the 5 men so that Rachel and Elizabeth could demonstrate the essence of the gospel, which was forgiveness. It was considered a huge victory for Christian missions. It became a real recruiting tool in the 60s and 70s and 80s for Christian missions. And Rachel Saint began to tour Waorani converts into the US and even to Europe, where they would sing their version of Jesus Loves Me at Billy Graham crusades and missions conferences. And that's where the story ends, as far as most evangelical accounts are concerned. In the past few years, I've been pretty preoccupied by the threat of climate change and by the politics of oil. And Ecuador is a very tragic story in that regard. When Texaco went into eastern Ecuador in the 1960s, they found a pristine rainforest. It was the most biodiverse area on the planet. Texaco did not bother to follow international cleanup standards, and the result has been called the greatest environmental catastrophe on the planet. 1,000 open tar pits were left behind. They fouled the waterways on which indigenous people rely. And all of this was to extract enough oil to meet US demands for 13 days. When I first read about this in 2012, I began to recall those exotic indigenous people that were so vivid in my childhood, and I wondered how they had fared under the banner of Jesus. I became very interested in connecting the dots between what had been framed when I was young as a heroic spiritual mission and this contemporary reality of exploitation and loss. And so I started researching the story of Operation Auca. And I learned that Elizabeth Elliot had left Ecuador after about 3 years, but Rachel Saint stayed, and she lived with the Waorani until 1994 when she died. Elliot was in many ways quite a progressive thinker and quite open-minded with respect to Waorani customs, quite curious about their culture. But Rachel Saint had almost a 19th century mindset, and I think a very autocratic personality. And fatally, her goals for the Waorani people were very closely aligned with the oil industry. I learned through my research that she actually had a hand in brokering a deal with the Ecuadorian government that would move the Waorani people into 8% of their traditional lands. They called this a protectorate. We would call it a reserve. But it opened up all of their territory for safe resource extraction. And the next step was to lure Waorani clans who lived far away in the rainforest, to lure them into this protectorate. So Rachel Saint and her converts and other missionaries that joined her, once they spoke the Waorani language, they accepted helicopter flights from the oil companies and located distant longhouses and persuaded these clans to come to the protectorate. So this collaboration with Big Oil suited the missionaries' purposes too, because Rachel wanted a sedentary community where she could build a church and build a school, and sort of westernize the Waorani people. But for the Waorani people, it spelled the end of trekking. It meant that the protectorate was hunted out very quickly. And the people were almost entirely dependent on Rachel Saint, who had supplies flown in and who used that power in a very heavy-handed way to strip from them any of their traditional cultural ways. It wasn't long before contact illnesses ravaged the community, beginning with polio. And settlers from the outside, roads were built, settlers from the outside moved in, they began to intermarry with the Waorani people, the language began to vanish. So it's a very sadly familiar story of the catastrophic effects on Indigenous people of colonization. I was really interested in what I learned through research about the initial approach of the missionary men to the Waorani people. There was a lot that was new to me. I was astonished actually by the recklessness and the magical thinking of the way they went about that mission. The 5 men were in fierce competition with Rachel Saint as to who could reach the Auca first. And she was actually learning the language from a Waorani woman who had left her people and was living on a hacienda. And Rachel Saint moved to the hacienda. She had studied with this Waorani woman for a couple of years. And numerous sources assert that the missionary men stole her language notes. And this was a source of the phrases that they shouted through the megaphone when they set up their camp in Waorani territory. I also learned, and this is terrifying to people who have respected these missionaries for decades. I learned that the missionary man shot, fatally wounded a Waorani man in that final attack. And this is absolutely a fact. According to the Waorani people who were witnesses, they talk about this man by name, and everyone witnessed that attack. But it's never acknowledged by the missionaries. And I guess, to be fair, when Elizabeth Elliot wrote her initial memoir, it wasn't known because nobody at that point was talking to the Waorani people. So, it was decades since I had thought very much about Operation Auca, and I hadn't really, I was vaguely critical of it, but I hadn't really formulated all of my concerns about it. I saw a big story here, but I thought a lot about why I would want to write it as a novel. If my only motive was to debunk the missionary account and give an alternate account, I had to wonder what was the point, because this incident was 60 years ago and the world has moved on, and most people understand the folly of such endeavors and the cultural arrogance at the heart of them. And many people are appalled by it, as the reaction to John Chow's crusade in the Indian Ocean demonstrates. But within evangelical churches, the mythology of the martyrdom of Jim Elliot and his friends is strangely untouched. I visited Ecuador twice. The missionary headquarters in the town of Shell has been restored as a museum. And on my second visit, it was full of American tourists. One of them referred to it in talking to me as a sacred shrine. The whole enterprise is still generating what I would call white savior narratives. 3 new books were published in 2019 alone, not counting mine. There are documentary films, there's a feature film, there are comics and animations, and there's a musical, and many websites. The story is a standard part of the curriculum in many Christian schools. It's been elaborated, but its basic assumptions remain unchallenged. It's a story of how light penetrates darkness, how civilization confronts savagery, and In this story, Indigenous people in the Amazon continue to be cast as primitive and in need of saving. This past winter, Nate Saint's grandson came to speak to a church in Winnipeg, and a publicity notice went out saying, Jamie Saint's family ministers to the savage Auca Indians in Ecuador. So I thought a lot about this, and I thought about why racism is so difficult to root out of our society. And it seems to me that this devotion to old narratives is part of that. And it really sealed my commitment finally to embark on a novel about Operation Auca. Five Wives may be set largely in 1956, but as I was working, it felt like a very contemporary story to me. I was blown away by the resonances between that story and current events. The othering of refugees at the southern US border, for example. The ongoing sense of entitlement of Western societies to resources around the world. Writing this novel reminded me forcefully how our stories determine our behavior and how hard it is often to break out of our ideological bubbles. It was a fascinating journey, and in a way that journey has continued for me as I have conversations with people about this book. So after the break, I'm going to talk about the process of what it was to take a real event like Operation Auca and turn it into fiction.
Hi everybody, my name is Glenna Switzer, and I just want to say thank you to the Lyric Theatre for asking me to sing a few of my tunes for the Lyric digital stage Right Out Loud. This song is the very first song I ever wrote, so for sentimental reasons I put it on my album, and people seem to like it. I told you I was leaving town, told you I wouldn't be around for long, told you when you came around, very soon I would be gone, told you I had nothing to give, told you I had dreams to live, places to go and things to feel, the world is there to see. It's time for me to go, I can't take you with me. And what I'm saying you already know, I really have to leave. I know that I love you and your heart is breaking, I'm sorry if I hurt you. My heart will stay, but my drifting feet just pull me away from you. I want to see the gleaming lights along Las Vegas Strip. I want to feel the blazing sun along the Texas plain. I want to walk in the burning sand and watch the fishing boats and where they land, and the people and the places and the sights and the sounds, so many strange new worlds. It's time for me to go, I can't take you with me. And what I'm saying you already know, I really have to leave. I know that I love you and your heart is breaking, I'm sorry if I hurt you. My heart will stay, but my drifting feet just pull me away from you. Already My heart will stay, but my drifting feet just pulled me away from you. My heart will stay, but my drifting feet just pulled me away from you. I was a lonely prairie girl, no kids around to play. I heard a song named Galveston on the radio one day. I went to town and bought the record at the local hardware store. A whole new world opened up, I wasn't lonely anymore. I need you now. This growing up life's too busy, and I miss you. I could sure use your help right now, 'cause there is just no time to stop long enough to listen to the songs you sang for me. I need you now. I was a lonely prairie girl, but I felt right at home with that black vinyl spinning around those songs. They were my own, the best friends that I ever had. They showed me the truth, for no one else, just for me, and they always pulled me through. I need you now. 'Cause growing up life's too busy, and I miss you. I could sure use your help right now, 'cause there is just no time to stop long enough to listen to the songs you sang for me. I need you now. Life can let you down, the songs you never do. I'm gonna dig out that old record player and spend some time with you. I need you now. 'Cause growing up life's too busy, and I miss you. I could sure use your help right now, 'cause there is just no time to stop long enough to listen to the songs you sang for me. I need you now. I could use your help right now. This next song I don't do very often. It's the song I wrote and sang for my husband on our wedding day. And we just celebrated our 34th wedding anniversary. Today is the day we will never forget, and here we have shown how much we're in love. And today is the day you promised never to go away, and we'll be together forevermore. Today is the day that I kissed Mom goodbye. She said, "Child, be happy. He's a good man, you know." And today is the day Daddy walked down the aisle with his only daughter to give her away. And like the gold band, life's a circle, and what lies ahead, the pain and the joy. But we'll fight the battles and take what God gives us, and like the circle, our love will go on and on. Today is the day, and there won't be another to tear us apart. We are one now, you know. And today is the day that I promise you, babe, that we'll be together till death do us part. And like the gold band, life's a circle, and what lies ahead, the pain and the joy. But we'll fight the battles and take what God gives us, and like the circle, our love will go on and on. And we'll be together from this moment on.
Hi, everybody. During the years I was writing Five Wives, Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission was holding sessions. And if I wanted to explore the relationship between my people and Indigenous people, you might think that I could have found a story a little bit closer to home. I could have looked maybe at my place as a settler in Treaty 1 lands where both sides of my family were homesteaders on Cree and Ojibwe lands. But my research had given me such a sharp awareness of the way the inequities we see today are faced on old mythologies. And for me, Operation Auka was close to home. I began to think of all the hours I spent in church listening to missionaries talk about taking the gospel to the heathen, because that word was constantly used. I recalled that Indigenous spirituality was never acknowledged, or that it was regarded as demonic, and that traditional healers were described as witch doctors. Our ways as white settlers of European descent were the standard by which all other cultures were judged. So Five Wives and the work I was doing in research and writing made me more conscious of all the aspects of my own childhood teaching and my indoctrination that I might have glossed over. I studied a photograph of the 5 wives taken a year after their husbands were killed. It was taken in Quito, and there's 7 small children in this picture of the 9 that these men left behind. I felt a deep kinship to these women. After the massacre, Elizabeth Elliot, who was kind of their leader, warned the other wives not to cry, but rather to rejoice that God had made martyrs of their husbands. And I was recalled to the experience when I was a teenager of losing my older sister. She died of cancer. And we were counseled the same way, that we should not express grief, but rather we should demonstrate to the whole town that we had hope in Christ, that my sister had gone to heaven. But through this process of writing, I began to grasp in a new way how destructive this kind of thinking is. Not just the suppression of emotion, but the suppression of thought. To believe that truth had come down to you by divine decree, and to suspend all critical thinking about it. To accept as true things that are on the face of it absurd, like that God had created the earth in 6 days, 6,000 years ago. To suppress all of your doubts, and to suppress all of your questions, and to condemn yourself for having doubts. To believe that you and the tiny circle of people around you had the only truth, and that everybody else, every other faith system on earth, was wrong. Currently in politics, we're seeing rather vividly the consequences of this sort of thinking. One of the reviews of my novel said that the missionaries were clearly deeply stupid people or crazy. I want to stress that I did not view them as stupid, and I did not view them as crazy. I didn't have the luxury of believing that I was fundamentally different from them. I would say that my purpose was actually the opposite, to describe what happens when intelligent and sane people systematically replace empirical fact with ideology. I was really determined to write about them from the inside, and to write about them authentically, and to treat them with respect and not to caricature them. These women had been heavily indoctrinated as children, and they had all taken vows to obey their husbands, and yet I had to believe that they had choices, and that in some ways each of them was responsible for what happened. They might have suppressed their doubt and their grief, but I saw them as fully human. And so in the novel, I gave them the gift of doubt, and I gave them the gift of grief. I used a very intimate writing technique that allows a writer to enter the thoughts a character hardly dares to acknowledge. It's almost more intimate than your own thoughts. These women might look very similar when you look at pictures, but when I began to write, I discovered how dramatically different each personality was. And that was one of the greatest joys for me in writing, to juxtapose all of these very different points of view, to see the interplay of them. Marge Saint was the wife of the pilot Nate Saint, and she had 3 tiny children. And just to think about her life made me tired. She ran a sort of a hotel for missionaries that were passing through in the town of Chalmette. I worried at first that when I got to her section of the story that it wouldn't be very interesting, because she was so tied up with domestic things. But in fact, she became one of my favorite characters. In my novel, she's dismayed when Nate, her husband, discovers the Warani longhouses from the air, and gets excited about launching Operation Auca. She recognizes the risk. But that summer, they're already in a conflict about whether they will homeschool their 6-year-old daughter or send her all the way to Quito to go to missionary boarding school. So I'm going to read a brief passage tonight in which Marge and Nate are arguing about these 2 issues in bed. In the night, Nate turns on the bedside lamp and drags Marge up out of a deep well of sleep. David is wailing against his shoulder. Holy cow, Marge moans, shielding her eyes. This has got to end. She shrugs herself up against the pillow. This is newborn behavior. He'll take a few swallows and then he'll fall right back to sleep. Nate hands the baby to her and lies down himself, facing in the other direction. He'll be back snoring again in 2 minutes if she doesn't talk fast. Listen, Nate, she says as she pulls down her nightgown and gets David settled. I'm sorry we didn't get time to talk before. I've been thinking all day about what you said. I know this is a big thing for you, but you have to listen to me. I am in quicksand, up to my knees and sinking fast. If I keep very calm and focused, we might be able to survive until these kids are out of diapers, but we can't take on a whole new ministry. It was Tuesday he spied the huts. He's been looking for years, crisscrossing the territory south of the Napo anytime he has spare fuel on his flight home. He's seen abandoned homes several times because the Auca apparently move around a lot. But the day before yesterday, he located an inhabited settlement for the first time, beside a little stream an hour's walk north of the Kurirai, hidden away in dense forest. First he spied a yucca plantation, big and well-tended. Just past the shogger, he saw 4 palm-leaf longhouses spaced out among the trees, and he saw people on the paths between the houses. He took a good look and noted the coordinates, and then he turned around and flew back to Shanja to tell Jim and Betty. Marge has heard about that part of it, although she's not going to say so. She can feel Nate's excitement still as strong as yesterday. It's like having a stranger in their bed, preventing them from talking frankly. Nate folds his pillow so he can roll over on his side and watch her face. There's nothing for you to take on, he says. This won't make a single difference to your work. We'll just start a campaign of gift drops. Get them interested. Let them know we're friendly. That's all it is. That's all for now, but eventually you will want to go in. He shakes this off. Nate, of course you will. Otherwise, what's the point? Remember what it was like for us when you crashed? When you sent out that distress signal and then went dead? You want to give me one more shock like that? It will finish me altogether. Nate, she waits until his eyes focus on her again. Honey, I am really tired. He reaches over and cups her forehead gently. Eagle wings, he says. That's shorthand for those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. That verse has a lot more to do with you than it does with me, Marge says. David is already asleep, as she predicted. Nate notices and gets out of bed, reaching down for him. Thank you, honey, she says when he comes back. It's kind of him to get up with David. He almost never does it, but he hasn't changed his diaper, and the clammy mess between David's legs will wake him up extra early and quite possibly leave him with diaper rash. So really, how much help was it? He turns off the lamp and crawls into bed. As her eyes adjust to the dark, she makes out the thrilling angle of his shoulder. Prudently, she shifts over on the bed, leaving a safe zone between them. Rhythm, speed, steadiness, guts. That's what Nate loves about her. He throws something hard her way, throws it fast and deftly. She catches it. Nate, I hate to let you down, she says. He doesn't respond. I hate to let you down, but I really don't get it. All we do, your huge circuit and the way you maintain the plane and the generators and keeping all those missionaries safe and building the clinic and hospital, it's more than enough. She leans over to get his attention in the dark. So just forget it. You're not ending up in the jungle with a lance through your heart. This gets his attention. He rouses himself and sits up in the bed, pulling up his knees. You know, Marge, I haven't told you everything. I didn't tell you exactly how it happened. Okay, so tell me. Well, remember there was a really low ceiling on Tuesday. The clouds were rock solid all day. They never broke. But when I was flying home, just as I was crossing the Napo, a hole opened in the southwest. It was shaped exactly like a keyhole, and it was low, close to the horizon, so the sun was streaming through at an angle. It was like one of those pictures you see of the rapture. Everything was in 3D. The big old kapok trees were throwing shade on the canopy, and I could see the shadow of the piper skimming over the jungle ahead of me, almost as if it was leading me on. That was how I spied that chakra in the forest. I would never normally have seen it. It was like I literally saw God's hand. I saw God reach down and open the clouds with a finger. He was saying, "Look, Nate, look, there you go." His eyes are fixed on her through this whole story. If God's calling me, Margie, he's calling you. You made a vow. He drops back on his pillow, and after a minute, she lies down too. He has never, ever pulled this before, not once since the day she stood with a bunch of woody-stemmed lilacs in her hand and promised to obey him. The minister explained what the vow meant. Nate obeyed the Lord, and Marge obeyed Nate. It struck Marge then as an efficient arrangement, and she knew she had more hope of dealing with Nate than she ever did with God. She lies on her back and listens to the song of the crickets and frogs and cicadas, and to Nate's breathing, which now that he said his piece, quickly turns to a gentle snore. Possibly she sleeps, because the next time she opens her eyes, the room is bright and her thoughts are clear, and Nate is lying on his side looking at her. Who can find a virtuous woman? Her children rise up and call her blessed. "Listen," she says, rolling over to face him full on. "I'll stop fighting you on this, but Debbie is not going to boarding school in Quito. I'm not sending my little girl to an orphanage on the other side of the Andes." In the morning light, she sees a blink of a scent, so quick, only a wife would catch it. I set out to connect the dots between that old missionary story and the current politics of oil, and what I found blew me away. I loved learning about the Waorani culture, their reverence for the forest and the meditative chanting and the sharing protocols and the way they refused to accumulate material goods. So it was very painful to read about social conditions in the Waorani settlements today and about the devastation of their lands. It made me wish that more of the cultural transference had gone in the other direction. And of course, Amazonian people are facing a terrible threat with COVID-19, especially since their elders, who are in a way the living encyclopedias of an oral culture, are threatened. But there are also hopeful stories. The Waorani have been organizing effectively for the last decade. In 2019, their organization, Conconawep, sued the Ecuadorian government for conducting an oil auction of their lands without proper consultation. This is the same clause of international law that Indigenous groups in Canada have used to challenge pipeline expansion. Conconawep won, and drilling was suspended in 500,000 acres of primary rainforest. After the court victory, there was a great scene in the streets of Puyo, in front of the courthouse. Waorani activists wearing traditional feather crowns and clutching cell phones and dancing in the rain. I'm really moved by their activism. The welfare of the whole planet depends to a substantial degree on the health of the Amazon, and the Waorani are at the forefront of the fight to preserve it. 70 years ago, a handful of Americans thought they were going into Ecuador to save the Waorani, and now, in a very real sense, it's the Waorani who are working to save us. That's all I wanted to share with you tonight. I really wish we could have a in-person question and answer. But if you have some questions, or if you'd just like to comment and extend this conversation, you can look me up on my website. There's an email address there. And if by chance you're part of a book club that is reading Five Wives, you can invite me to do a Skype visit to your book club, or a Zoom visit. I'd be very happy to do that. So thank you so much for being part of this tonight, and I hope you'll keep well. Bye for now.
Thank you, Joan. That was truly wonderful. we really appreciate you and your wonderful words. I think a lot of us are very excited to read that book and other books that you've written if we haven't had the chance to already. So thank you for that. And Glenna, thank you again. We just love your original compositions. Everything comes from the heart, and it's really wonderful. So thank you. And Terry, of course, and the committee for making this all possible. We'll look forward to the next presentations. We'll have the whole season ready to go. But of course, if we get a chance to get back in the theater, that's the first place we'll go. And your support has allowed us to stay open so far, and it is allowing us to stay open for the next while, and we hope for the long term. So if you haven't already and you want to, feel free to send us a check or money order to the Lyric Theatre, Box 1143, Swift Current, Saskatchewan, S9H 3X3, or if you want to make an e-transfer, it's treasurer@lyrictheatre.ca. Thank you for your support, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. And spread the word. Remember that this presentation remains on YouTube and on Facebook for quite a while, so you can come and see it again. Okay, stay safe, stay well, and blue skies ahead. Thanks.